We humans are pack animals, and it seems equally so in travelling to and from the spiritual realm. These stories from 3 Weird World viewers show how our departed kin rally around family members regardless of that divide. Kathleen. Kathleen writes that when she was little, her family lived in a fairly old house on a very busy street. She is the younger of 2 daughters in her family and describes herself as a firm believer in the paranormal. When Kathleen was 6 years old, her family moved from the old house and into a new house that they were buying from the original owners. The house was only 6 years old, as it had been finished 1 month before she was born. A few days before the big move, Kathleen woke up in the middle of the night and clearly saw 3 older people standing in the doorway of her bedroom. She described one as a short, heavy-set woman and the other 2 as taller, thinner, old men. She had never seen these people before in her life, but they seemed to know her. She felt a little scared by the sight of these 3 people, but didn't want to worry her parents by telling them about her seeming apparition. 10 years later, Kathleen was looking around the family room in the new house when she came across her parents' wedding album. This felt like quite a cool coincidence to her, as the day she found it was their 26th anniversary. Being a naturally curious person, she looked through the album and finally came to a picture of her parents and grandparents together. She was completely freaked out by what she saw. There were the 3 people she had seen just before they had moved into this house. The woman and one of the men were her mother's parents, who had both passed away before her sister and she were born, and the other man was her other grandfather. She was aware that he had passed away a little over 1.5 years before she was born. Finding the photograph was very moving, and she has never told her parents about it in all the ensuing 24 years. Seemingly, her caring grandparents were checking in on her just before the big house move. Sixto. Sixto describes growing up in the Caribbean and with a certain belief that his father would often tell him lies to entertain him. He believed the stories to be made up and intentionally fictional due to their far-fetched nature. For context, Sixto explains that his father was not an active member of his life, but would fade in and out of frame like an elusive shimmerer. He was a doctor working for the government, military, and independently across their island, and his medical work required him to be stone cold, devoid of emotion, and stoic. However, his patients loved him due to his serious nature, as they felt lucky to benefit from his dedication. However, as a son, Sixto found it very difficult to understand his absence, and so naturally, whenever he had the chance to sit and speak with him, they would explore conversations so bizarre that he would mistake them for bedtime stories. When he was young, his father once recalled a deep memory inside his mind to share with Sixto and his brother. The 3 were sitting under a blanket of stars on top of their roof, feeling the warm breeze of the Caribbean in pitch black. The dad began his tale, as he did most times, using familiar language that was easy on the ears. But as the story progressed, the boys started noticing plenty of nuggets of truth within the plot. Their dad began by saying that his mother, their grandmother, had had an encounter with a shaman who spoke to her in a language made of sounds and tunes with no particular order. Not only did she understand the melody, but could sing the tune back in her head over and over again. At this time, the shaman told her that their family had life ties with the stewards of death called the Banshee, and that what their grandmother would hear as song would actually be the grieving of loved ones screaming in agony as they know they are about to perish. Sixto adds for more context that although Caribbean people can be quite superstitious and religious, his own father was more guided by science and logic. Any talk of folklore was frowned upon in the family, so normally it would have shocked both his brother and himself to the core. As the dad continued, he also recalled different memories in which he claimed to be able to see, feel, and hear the chanting of music just before anybody in their family was to pass away. He said that he kept this mostly to himself in order to both test his own sanity and observe if other members of the family were sharing the same experience. However, without fail, other family members shared similar feelings of aversion towards the supernatural, so any talk of folklore was rare. Sixto explained that his father became very ill in the later stages of his life, and they would spend a great amount of time talking and just hanging out watching TV. They became close and never spoke about those earlier stories again. However, one day the nurse that used to visit his father at home pulled Sixto aside and asked if they had any older women staying in the house. She had supposedly seen an elderly woman dressed in grey pacing back and forth between the bathroom outside his father's room and the balcony where she stared into the green fields. So as not to frighten the nurse, Sixto lied and told her that she was his dad's sister, who was very worried and had decided to visit him out of the blue. Later that night, he asked his father if the banshee was still visiting him. He says that until this very day, his father's reply shoots electricity through his body. His answer was simply, "They have become my friends over the years. They bring by family members that you know you will never see again for a final goodbye." Sixto asked him, "Isn't that terrifying?" But in his usual monotone voice, his dad asked in reply, "You never heard them before?" Sixto responded to him with a no, due to never having shared that experience, and saw his father smile as if he felt grateful. He seemed elated at having his secret now out in the open between him and his family members, as if he had broken a 100-year-old curse. Sixto respected his father very much, in particular his intellect and moral code, but could never prove the stories were real, as he had never seen or heard anything himself. However, after hearing his father and the nurse describe in detail what they had experienced, he now has no doubt that his family sometimes can interact with what he knows as the banshee. In fact, multiple people confirmed the same event. Lillian. In early July 2012, Lillian remembers being at home while her mother was in the hospital. 4 years prior, her mother had been diagnosed and treated for acute lymphoma, then had 2 years of remission. However, the lymphoma had recurred even more aggressively. Lillian was walking through the dining room and towards the kitchen when she saw someone sitting at the head of the dining table in her mother's usual spot. Initially, she thought it was an intruder, but it wasn't. The man whom she was looking at had dark skin and black wavy hair and wore grey clothes. His face was blurry, but his presence seemed familiar. She instantaneously thought him to be her uncle, but then realised that the person sitting in her mother's chair was not corporeal. She tentatively asked, "Grandfather?" and the figure disappeared. She felt her heart pounding. Then, as she turned back towards the kitchen, she saw him again. He was sitting on the back steps, again in her mother's usual spot, where he sat until he again disappeared. Lillian says that she stood there staring at the empty spot through the glass sliding door, now with a heavy heart. She knew who he was and why he had come visiting. Her grandfather had come for her mother because she was dying. She knew that his visitation had brought a message. He had come to tell Lillian because she could see him. Lillian believes that the night her mother passed away, he did come for her. She felt his presence and also felt her own father's presence, who had passed 4 years earlier. She believes they all left as her mother died, taking her to the other side with them. Sadly, Lillian lost all 3 of her loved ones to cancer and misses them every day.